partnership with Pan Communications, setting your 2020 communications plans up for success. Sorry, I'm getting said that we switched to listening only mode, but you all can still hear me? Oh, Carolyn and Darlene, I know that there's some audience issues. All right, great.
Yeah, great. Hear you as well.
So, okay, all right, excellent. So we're going to focus primarily on the technology sector, primarily on B2B as well. But I think much of what we're going to talk about, it will be universally applicable, I think even across sectors and definitely across B2B and B2C. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Arthi Shah. I'm executive editor for the Holmes Report, and I'll be moderating this discussion. And I want to quickly introduce our two great panelists who I think you are going to love their insight and perspective. What I also decided to do was to include their Twitter bios. So first is Carolyn Gus. So Carolyn is Vice President of Corporate Marketing at PagerDuty, and her Twitter bio is Brit in the Bay Area, VP of Corporate Marketing at PagerDuty. Welcome, Carolyn.
Thank you, Arti. Hi there.
And of course, we have Darlene. Darlene, I think this says more about Darlene than any bio could. Does not have a Twitter handle, so Darlene keeps a pretty low profile. But I think so I actually grabbed her bio from LinkedIn, and it is, I am a communicator and storyteller at heart. Welcome, Darlene.
Thanks so much, Arthi and Carolyn. So nice to be here with you as well.
Likewise.
So both of you have had long careers in tech PR, both on the brand and on the agency side. So I hope that you can both pull from your current positions as well as kind of from your long history in this sector, in this business. We will do audience Q&A. I'm going to invite you all to insert your questions as we're having the conversation. If we can get to it, we'll work it into the discussion. If not, we will leave 15 minutes at the end for audience Q&A. So I'm going to start with a big question, and that is, how would you describe your business priorities in 2020? Like, what are the emerging trends that are kind of coming to the forefront?
Sure.
And Carolyn, I'll let you start.
Sure. Yeah. So in terms of business priorities this year, as a B2B company, one of the things that we're seeing is that our customer is really changing. In tech, it used to be, in B2B tech, it used to be that there would be a very senior level decision maker. They'd make a large contract purchasing decision, and then they would really push that down on the employees to use. And they would care about things like compliance and training and onboarding. What we're really seeing over the last few years, and we think most acutely this year, is that employees just won't accept being told what tools to use anymore. So what that means is that they will, if they're having a really seamless experience in the consumer apps that they use, they expect a really seamless experience. And the work apps, they want to switch off email and move to Slack, for example. They want to move into collaboration tools. And the company is experiencing kind of a bottom-up decision-making inside their business. And we've really seen that with a lot of our customers actually being just, developers who sign up for PagerDuty with a credit card. So taking a step back, what that means for communications is that we have to very fundamentally change the way we communicate to a mass audience versus a niche audience, which has always been, I think, what B2B defines itself as, sort of, communicating to business leaders or business decision makers. So if everybody's a decision maker in the business, what does that mean for us? So we're looking to be a lot more grassroots in the way that we communicate. And we're also looking to understand that, employees, they care about mission. They don't just care about the product, they care about who's the company behind it. What does that company stand for? What good does that company have in the world? So we're looking to be very values first in the way we communicate. And we're thinking about the impact that we can have on the ecosystem that we're in through initiatives, like giving back, being more transparent about who we are and what we do as a business.
Yeah, the consumerization of tech, it seems like that's a trend that's continuing to amplify. And your point about purpose, we will definitely circle back to that as well. Darlene, I'd love to hear what you're saying, especially from your portfolio of clients.
Yeah, absolutely. So first, I have to comment and just reinforce. We're seeing the same thing from the work environment standpoint. It really is an employee-led communication strategy right now. So employees are really reinforcing how they want to communicate, where they want to communicate, what channels, and especially for our clients that are in kind of workforce management, it totally resonates with what you're saying there, Carolyn. We're seeing more and more of that. But holistically, taking a step back. From our client base, I think it's leads, pipeline, pipeline, pipeline. I don't think that has changed, and I don't anticipate it will change. We just wrapped up a client panel last week where we had kind of a cross-representation of our client base, both in technology and our healthcare practice areas. Pipeline was probably talked about. You know, if I had a nickel for every time it came up, I would be rich. So that's definitely not changing. I would also say there's a kind of a big push for less is more this year. I think brands are really starting to think about their communication strategy holistically and what can be pulled out of it. Where can they put 80% of the effort for the biggest lift versus, you know, spreading effort across all channels. So I definitely think we're seeing more of a movement for less is more. And then finally, just a really integrated holistic approach. I think that when we're talking and thinking about communications, we can't be working in silos, really making sure that marketing and communications and sales are really partnered so that there's a holistic approach to the communications campaigns. And I would actually put in, and I know we're going to have some conversation around it, that we're even seeing HR join that conversation more. And how do we think about integrated and holistic campaigns that work across all of those channels?
You know, Darlene, I'm gonna direct my second question first to you, and then I'll Caroline join in, because you mentioned sort of less is more, which sort of implies that there is being sort of a reallocation of resources. And I'm curious, sort of, you know, what are the areas in which you're pulling back from that maybe, you know, was a higher priority in 2019, and, you know, are there new areas in which you're putting resources this year that you hadn't previously?
Yeah. So I would say from a client perspective, I think our clients are getting a lot smarter on their social channels. So as more might mean making sure there's a really smart strategy around how you're using your channels. And, you know, if Facebook doesn't work for your audience, or if Facebook is just working from a culture standpoint, making sure you're putting the right level of effort and resourcing around that. If Twitter is the way that you're communicating with your B2B audience, ensuring that you're putting, you know, the right resources and budget around that. So I think what we're seeing is not necessarily that someone is abandoning a strategy, but more looking at what level of effort goes into each one of those channels, or each one of those areas. And I think similarly, when we talk about content strategy, certainly smart, really good content is still super important to our clients. But I think they're saying, you know what, we don't need to have 20 blogs a week. We need to have some, you know, very, very specific blogs for audiences that really resonate. So really being smart about the content that's being created and how it gets used across channels. So being able to leverage it and use it as much as possible versus creating more and more and more.
Right. Yes, yeah. We have been in a mode of create more and more and more for a while.
Yeah, absolutely.
Caroline, I'm curious to hear from you on this question.
Yeah, I completely agree on the less is more point. You know, I think there has been a trend to create content. Everybody must be a content creator. And then from there, I think, you know, we've started to look at, okay, what's happening with the distribution of this content? Where is it working effectively? So we audited our blog at the end of last year to help us with our 2020 planning. And, you know, our blog was covering a gamut of different topics and reaching different types of audiences. And what we found is that the content for us that was performing best was very specific how-to content, when we were really passing our expertise on to our customers and our blog readers. So that really taught us that that's the way we engage with our audience. But it also taught us that, you know, it's not just about having new content. If you have really high-performing content, you need to bring it back at certain moments in time.
Yeah.
If we're launching a new product that's cloud-focused, what was something that we shared 6 months ago that's still really evergreen and really relevant? So it's, I think, about having a great pool of content, but knowing how to distribute that smartly based on how you see the audience engaging with it.
Yeah. Carolyn, a quick comment on that too is I think sometimes there are some surprises from our clients. Like you're saying, when you look back at the analysis of what performed the best, you know, sometimes you're trying to, you know, create really high level content and it doesn't get the same amount of readership, where we have a DevOps client that it's uber technical and specific. Those are their most read blogs. For other clients, it's the culture blogs that are the most read blogs. So it's just interesting to actually go back and look at that data and see where the surprises are and how that helps inform strategy going forward.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think just data is everything to us. And, it's always been challenging, somewhat challenging to measure in our world. But as we become content creators in our business, and so we have a little bit more control of the channels, and we can apply our own analytics to the channels because they're own channels.
Yeah.
It actually helps me to understand how to use media messaging, seeing what resonates on our blog. What are people really engaging with? So that's a narrative that we've tested there, and maybe we need to double down on it with media, because it is that bit harder to understand how your messaging is resonating in the earned side of the fence.
And that the earned media piece is something that I want to revisit in a bit more depth. To close this conversation out, I mean, Darlene, to your point about being intentional about each of your communications platforms, we're seeing this increasingly where we'll see certain companies use their blogs specifically for recruiting. So it will be focused just on culture. Or, Carolyn, to your point, it'll be very much kind of a guide or a resource for their specific customer base. And that leads me to my next question is, how are you evaluating your functions this year? So Carolyn, how are you evaluating communications and corporate marketing at PagerDuty in 2020? And Darlene, from you, I'd be curious to hear, what kind of metrics are you hearing from your clients, both in terms of how they want to evaluate the work you're doing, but also how they're being evaluated internally within their organizations?
Yeah.
Sure, I can start with that one. So we have, as part of the marketing team, we're part of the go-to-market team. And so we have demand gen metrics. And actually it's at the highest level, it's really about ROI being a multiple of the budget. And then within that, we break out into some very specific demand gen metrics about how many leads we're adding into the top of the funnel. I made the decision not to include PR and media relations in that process because I feel that it's so much, going back to the fact that it's an earned discipline, the type of metrics, if we would put it in a single dashboard, which is often what you hear a CMO wants, I feel that the value of PR would be lost in the reader's eye. We can demonstrate that we created a white paper and we ran a campaign with that white paper and it led to this many leads, and then these many leads of that group came through to fruition. And we just can't demonstrate that in the earned world. But what we do here is, anecdotally, an SVP at an investment bank read a piece about us working with his competitor and got in touch. And that could be one of the biggest deals that we do that year. And it began with PR. So I really am looking at messaging pull-through as the metric for PR this year. So what we're doing is figuring out conversations that we're in, that we want to be in, conversations that we're not in that we want to be in, consistency of how we're described, because I think this is one of the big challenges of B2B technology companies, is that people don't always understand what they do. And it's really on us to be clear yet differentiated. So consistent messaging is pulling through. And then we're also looking at a balance of coverage. I think you have to balance out between product storytelling and then culture and leadership storytelling. And I think in the past there's been a rotation towards, well, are you talking about what the business does and what the product does? And being more mission driven, we're now looking also at, how are we as a sort of a citizen of the technology world? How are we recognized? Are we seen as a good place to work by our employees and therefore by the outside world? And those types of articles are getting kind of a higher weighting than they might have done.
Carolyn, just to follow up on that, I mean, to your point about, you're looking at message pull through, you're looking at some anecdotes around, how some of these deals may have, what the origins of them might have been. Do you think at some point there will be pressure to show more direct business impact for communications, or I'm not talking specifically at PagerDuty, I'm talking, just more broadly in the industry?
I used to think that was going to happen. I think that social media kind of really came into the fore as people started creating their own content. I felt like there was a time, and this was back when I was on the agency side, that could happen, and it could be kind of really negative for PR and media relations. But I think that people are recognizing that there will always be a value for unbiased quality reporting. And I think we need it more than ever in today's world. And I think that the PR has been recognized as a true strategic specialism. So I don't think we will come under pressure and be held to standards that don't really apply to, the value that PR has. That's my view. And I think, I work for a very PR forward company. But I do think that I hear that from my peers on the inside that PR is always a small team, but it's a specialism that every smart company recognizes is very important and can't be measured by demand gen metrics.
Mm-hmm.
So Darlene, I'm curious because you had mentioned earlier that you're feeling a lot of pressure around pipeline lead gen. Is that on the marketing initiatives or also on the communications?
I think it sits on both sides. So, I think that there's a way that we always have to provide that qualitative analysis of what we're doing effectively. So we're always asking for the keys to GA because we want to show, how media coverage is actually impacting referral traffic. What does that look like? Making sure that we're really smart about, for example, when we're talking about media coverage, that it's in publications that actually matter, that actually hit the key audience. So having that weighting, as you said, Carolyn, some of our clients want that weighting of these publications matter this much, these ones matter this much. So everything is weighted appropriately. Certainly, share of voice is still a big part of our ask and conversation. We like to even take share of voice into the next layer down, which is share of voice again in that set of publications and outlets that matter the most, audiences that matter the most. And then finally, I think that there's always a level. Carolyn, you touched on it perfectly, and I know I've sat on the in-house side as well, and I think that there is always going to be a spirit within communications that there is a gut element of what we do. So I'll always say to teams, we can meet metrics and still miss expectations. And then conversely, you could miss a metric and then blow it out of the water because you do one really, really meaningful thing that quarter. Maybe it's, a piece of coverage in the journal. Maybe it's an influencer that gets up and talks about you as a result of an engagement that you've had. So I think you always have to have that weighted balance of here's the data that supports the story. And here are, Carolyn, to your exact point, the anecdotes and the softer side of PR where that it's had an impact on the business outcomes.
Yeah.
So we love hearing those anecdotes. We get so excited when clients will bring that forth.
Yeah, I so agree with you on the Google Analytics piece and needing to build in other measures of the value of an article. Share of voice is the classic one that, a lot of firms like to use and clients are asking for. I mean, one of the learnings that we had was that, often our share of voice will be impacted by a negative thing that happens to one of our competitors. So data alone makes you think they're beating you. But they're not. So one of the things that actually my agency team did for our 2020 planning was to share something they developed internally, which weighted the types of publications based on our business goals. So if our business goals were to reach a certain type of audience, they would analyze the audience of that publication and then give it a weighting. So it was moving away a little bit from this typical idea of tier 1 has a large audience and tier 2 has a less large audience.
Right.
And got into kind of the specifics of audience. And that's been really helpful because going back to your point about demand gen and metrics, my boss does have a need for metrics, but I feel like if I can create a weighting based on, actual sort of PR criteria, media criteria, not marketing criteria, I can answer that need without having to kind of fall back on the old share of voice route.
Right. Right.
Carolyn, I'm really glad you mentioned the media sort of rating system, because I was actually thinking as you all were talking, how do you identify the media that matters? Because that must vary for each client and which audience they're trying to reach. Darlene, do you all have a system in place in which how you sort of identify which media is most important for each client without, just doing the regular, tier 1 business, tier 2, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. We like for every one of our clients to have that list of like the top 15 publications. And it doesn't mean it's all business press. To your exact point, Carolyn, it might be a trade publication, but it's really audience driven. So we start we start from the audience place, which is, who are you really trying to reach? Who is most important for driving that business outcome? So we do a look at, what audience is most important, and then we develop a publication list. And we try to look at that every quarter for our clients. We don't sit idle. Things evolve, businesses evolve, priorities. So we try to review those on a quarterly basis, but we've done that exact weighting as well for some of our clients. And it might be a mix of a business press outlet, a trade publication, and it might even be a blog. And all three of those are considered a tier one for that particular client. So it's really audience driven.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I mean, LinkedIn has a huge audience.
Yes.
There are Forbes contributors with huge audiences. Medium can provide a huge audience. So it's really important to take a more holistic look, and I think not just base it all in traditional media. Yeah. We have certain moments where we want a publication with a large audience, and that might be if it's a significant product launch, and we know that they are followed by other publications. But we have a number of what I would possibly call tier 3 publications in our tier 1 list. So the New Stack would be an example of that. It's well respected amongst developers and IT ops, and that's our core audience. So if we want to be credible, we need them to see us as credible. Right. So that's a huge priority for us.
So, Carolyn, I want to talk a little bit more about some of the platforms you mentioned: YouTube, Medium, LinkedIn. But first, I want to round out our earned media conversation to talk a little bit about, we're sort of seeing a swing back to earned. It felt like there were a lot of distractions for a while, and everybody felt like they needed to be a publisher and be involved in all different platforms and channels. But the research is showing that what ultimately seems to drive behavior is earned. But on the flip side of that, we obviously are continuing to operate in a really challenging news environment. We have newsrooms, an incredibly saturated news cycle. There's news fatigue. So I'm curious around, what media narratives are you all seeing that are breaking through right now?
A really timely question. Sorry, Darlene, do you want to go ahead?
No, go for it, please.
It's a really timely question for me. We had a media dinner last night, and one of the things that we hear from media is just their time is so constrained to spend time with individual companies. So we actually hosted a dinner with some of what I would call our sort of peer group friend companies, so other SaaS businesses. So we had 4 CEOs. And we heard from all the media that was really valuable to them, not just because of the efficiency it creates, that you get to kill 4 birds with 1 stone, as one of the journalists told me, but also because of the type of content and storytelling that it engendered. Nobody was there to particularly push their own business and their own product. And so the media started asking us real macro questions, what impact do you think the election's going to have on sales for your business? Digital transformation, it seems so trite. Everybody talks about it. Where are we? What does that look like for your business right now? What does it feel like to compete with Microsoft or AWS? How are you going to survive? There are constantly new startups launching. Aren't there too many of you? Is there going to be consolidation? And, I found the conversation personally really enjoyable and engaging, and I think others around the table did. It was just really informative to me in what media need right now. They're looking to report on perspectives that all of us care about. It's the big stories, not the precise stories.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We see that same thing. First, Aarti, to the way you started the discussion, we've definitely seen that swing back to earned media over the last year in particular. And interestingly, we acquired a UK firm in the summer. And one of my first meetings with the CEO and now our managing director of that office, he said, "Are you seeing a major swing back to earned?" And he said, "We see it in our market as well." So it's interesting that seems to be the overarching trend. And I think it actually directly ties into one of the things that we've seen more demand for over the last 12 months, which is developing executive thought leadership platforms, because I think that's where we get our clients into conversations that are bigger than their company. It's about, issues-based conversations and things that are happening in the broader markets. It might be, just much bigger macro conversations, to your point, Carolyn. And I think that's why we've seen more demand for thought leadership platforms and executive platforms in particular.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of executive kind of thought leadership platforms, I'm just curious how many, how you all use LinkedIn blogs, how you use Medium, have you tried podcasts, and how do you measure whether these things are working? And I asked that because, I was in DC a few months ago at an event, and we had Microsoft there, and they said this on stage, and they said, they actually put a pause on podcasts because, as trendy as they are and as, ubiquitous as they are, they had a really hard time evaluating whether people were actually listening to them all the way through and, what kind of impact it was having. So given the amount of resources that was, that were put into the production, they decided it made more sense to pause. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious with these platforms, whether you have a YouTube channel or a LinkedIn thought leadership blog, or like you mentioned, a Forbes networkers blog, like how many resources are you putting on into some of these external platforms?
We launched our first podcast this year, actually end of last year, and it's very engineering specific though. So to your point about our people listening to the end of podcasts, we've been wondering the same thing. We participate, so our CEO will participate in other people's podcasts, screening for those that we consider to have a really big audience. But going back to the analysis that we did of our blog, and we found that the how-to content performed the best, which is focused on engineers, we launched a Paid It to the Limit, it's called Podcast, where we share that content in a podcast format. So it's an experiment for us. But our hope is that by being very niche and with the audience that we're going after, we're going to get really high engagement. So I will report back on how that goes. I think it is very hard. Podcasts were so trending that everybody got one, and it was very hard to know, is the effort really resonating?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think within our client base too, again, it comes down to the level of specificity. We have one client that has a podcast very much targeted at the developer audience. They love the content. It's done quarterly. But it's very specific, and measurement, Arthi, to your question there, around downloads, referrals, social mentions. So those are kind of the dimensions that our clients are looking at when they review the podcast. But when we talk about that less is more thing, I think for clients, is there a specific audience that they want to be targeting? And then, what's really the right touch? You don't need that to be weekly, perhaps not even monthly, but maybe quarterly is the right touch, or monthly is the right touch, but making sure that it's uber targeted and that you're not spinning something that's read by a very small listener set. Similarly, on the thought leadership campaign, I think that we see that's definitely more multi-channel. I think when we see that done effectively, LinkedIn is almost always a key part of that strategy. 99% of the time, if we're doing an executive thought leadership platform, LinkedIn is a key outlet. Their social channels, what kind of speaker presence, if we think about the full-on narrative for that executive, how are they carrying it into their speaking engagements, and what does that look like? How is that reflected in blog content, and then also in the media? So, I think when we're kicking off the platforms, we're always thinking about what is that high-level narrative for that executive, and then what are all the opportunities we have for carrying that story forward, using those channels smartly.
Right, because it's interesting. So you had mentioned at the beginning that some social channels that some of your clients were kind of pulling back from, but it sounds like they're amplifying their presence on LinkedIn,
yes,
and perhaps pulling back on some of the other channels.
Yeah.
I'm mindful of the fact that we are at the half-hour mark, so I just want to again remind those in the audience that feel free to kind of send questions along as we're having the discussion, or you're welcome to wait till the last 15 minutes when we'll formally open it up to questions. But I want to make sure that we touch on two things that we haven't talked about yet, and the first is employee engagement. As we have talked about, actually, employees have become one of the most critical stakeholder groups, especially for tech companies, because of the recruiting benefit of that. So, Carolyn, I want to start with this question with you. I know PagerDuty just hired a chief people officer with a focus specifically on culture, diversity, and inclusion. And I'm just curious, from your perspective, what role do you play in sort of shaping those things with this function?
Sure. I mean, we're very closely aligned with the people org in our team. So in our structure, internal comms is part of comms. not part of people, but it's very much a hand-in-hand relationship. We have a belief that employees should never hear about anything outside of PagerDuty first. So they should never be something in the media. When we became a public company last year, that became more challenging, but we're still holding ourselves to that standard. So as an example, when we report quarterly earnings, we gather everyone together so that they can watch the broadcast. And then immediately after the earnings call, instead of going into investor callbacks, our CFO will come in and do a town hall conversation with staff. So we're really trying to stand by that value that we have. Anytime we announce something, we announce it to the company first, and then shortly after we make the external announcement. And we do that because, there's two reasons really. One is that you just don't know if employees are going to leak something. So actually, in today's world with social media, internal and external have to be timed together. But the greater reason that we do that is because people first is one of our values. So if you're not actually putting people first in all these moments, you're not really living up to your values. And we benchmark and monitor very, very carefully what's happening with employees, because there is so much competition and people are constantly, getting approached. So we really, we can't have our values be something that we just talk about and don't live. So there's so many opportunities in PagerDuty to be heard. We have Slack groups. We have one called Rainbow Duty, which is an open conversation about inclusion, diversity, and equity. In our town hall meetings every month, we have a tool called Slido where people can post questions, and they can post as themselves or they can post anonymously. That can be stressful for those of us on the hook for answering the questions, because you don't know what you're going to get in front of all 700 employees. But if you truly want to be people first, you have to listen to all the people. And, our new chief people officer, this is the first time we've had that role. He liked us, and we chose him because he shares those values. He believes in building great people teams first, and he's really lived, because he comes from the technology world, he's really lived the pain of recruiting in the Bay Area. But the other thing I'd say that we're doing is we're really looking to recruit outside of the Bay Area. I think it's very easy to live in this bubble and think all the great talent is here. We opened an office in Atlanta last year, and recruiting there in all different functions has been so much easier than it is here. It's helping us to make sure that we really live a remote culture or a multi-office culture, that, we're not constantly sort of Bay Area centric. But I think all companies are going to have to get a bit more creative and invest in distributed working if they're really going to be truly people first and solve their talent problems.
Caroline, a follow-up to that around the people first. How prepared do you think tech organizations need to be for employee activism on the back of that? As we've seen some really high-profile cases in the last year. Google, Facebook, Microsoft, just to name a few. What is there anything that organizations can do, especially from a communication side, to sort of help this dialogue between employees and the management of the organization?
I think it's really important to align on, when you say you're mission driven or back, it's really important to be clear on what that means to you. Our employees are very vocal, and they'll call us out on the company-wide Slack channel if there's something happening in the news and they haven't heard us take a view on that and explain that we support the affected party or we're following any action. Often you'll see tech company CEOs signing petitions or putting their name on a list of supportive companies for a particular cause or issue that's happening. So what we've done is we've really set out to understand or think about how to prioritize where we will spend time. There's many causes that we support, but time-sensitive global health is our number one cause. And that gives us the opportunity, when companies ask, well, why don't you care more about carbon offsetting? It's not that we don't care about carbon offsetting, but we have this cause and we're very dedicated to it, and here's why we're very dedicated to it. So I think it's just being in front of it. It's actually following the news cycle and thinking through the employee lens and being ready to respond quickly. And it's also creating a safe space for employees to speak up to their leaders. Our employees will call our leaders out on the public Slack channel for making what they consider to be the wrong type of comment in the all hands meeting. You know, it's sort of a brave thing to do, but when you have a culture of trust and people can be honest like that, they will. And I think that's how you can avoid falling into employee activism. Although, you know, I recognize we're a much smaller company, so it's much easier to have that type of culture than if you are, you know, a Google or a Facebook.
Right. Darlene, was there anything you wanted to add in terms of employee engagement, and are you all being kind of brought in to sort of help with that kind of recruiting and, I mean, maybe even a retention initiative?
Yeah, definitely. There's been a lot more demand within the client base on help us shape our strategy around employee advocacy, because I think, you know, a lot of brands are aware of the fact that their best ambassadors sit within their four walls. So how do we best activate that group for elevating brand awareness? But I would say what became the real demand over the last 12 months has been around recruitment. It's a really challenging recruitment market. And how do you activate your employee base to help with that? You know, I was in a conversation earlier, I think like 5 years ago, we were talking so much about the CMO and the CIO working hand in hand as the marketing kind of group became so much more data driven. I think the last 12 months has been about the CMO and the CHRO becoming much more hand in hand and working together. And I think a lot of that is also driven by the fact that HR hasn't typically had those digital assets. You know, they don't come from that digital background. So they've been tapping into marketing to help leverage some of the skill set that helps them from a recruitment and engagement strategy that hasn't always been part of their hiring process within HR. So we've definitely seen that a lot. And then just one final comment, Carolyn, I think what you guys are doing is so innovative. I love the level of transparency. It's so cool. I love what you guys are doing with the town hall where the CFO speaks to your team before he speaks to a broader audience. So I think that's really incredible and stand out in the industry. And I just wanted to echo what you said around the what do you stand for? I think that when clients are coming to us around what bigger conversations do we want to be part of, I think really kind of defining those CSR initiatives and what you want to be most aligned with. You know, to your point, you can't be aligned with everything. So really collectively letting your employees help shape what it is that you want to stand for and putting kind of your collective efforts and funds and power behind those initiatives rather than kind of spreading it across everything.
Yeah.
Darlene, I'm curious from a recruiting perspective, if you're seeing what Carolyn's seeing, where there is a movement away from the Bay Area or any of these big tech centers to other cities, and because there would be a huge communications push to think around doing that.
Yeah, so I'll actually speak to it from Pan. I've been talking from a client standpoint, but I would say that we've had more conversations than ever in the last 12 to 24 months with one, being comfortable with hiring outside of like the exact skill set. You know, when I first started here 5 years ago, we were looking for people with agency experience or in-house experience, but it was very much like for like. And I think we've gone a lot broader and definitely thinking about distributed workforce. We have folks working for us in Philadelphia. We have someone in Seattle, and thinking about secondary markets where it's really about finding the talent and thinking about talent first versus location first. Like we have all the technology we need to be connected. We're all sitting here on this call with everybody in their homes and offices, and all that good stuff. So there's really no reason to just be focused on core markets, but it's really focused on core talent sets and where you get that talent.
I want to come back to the talent conversation, but just to close our purpose, you all have mentioned, you know, Carolyn, you mentioned sort of prioritizing the issues that you want to take a stand on rather than sort of, you know, having your CEO sign every single petition that comes across. And Darlene, you mentioned the same thing, that it's, you know, really focusing on a few key issues. So I'm curious, what are the issues that are coming up in 2020 that seem like folks are most interested, or organizations are most interested in taking a stand on? And I ask this because, well, first of all, because, you know, I've been following the conversation in Davos, right? And of course, it's been really centered around, you know, of course, the updated statement of the purpose of a corporation from the Business Roundtable, which of course last year moved from just shareholders to kind of putting all stakeholders on equal footing, and that's customers, employees, communities, suppliers, and then of course shareholders as well. So I'm curious whether that, you know, updated purpose has been factoring into any of your conversations, both internally or with your clients, and then on the back of that, you know, what are the issues that are coming up that are most important to their various stakeholders?
Mm-hmm.
We're noticing climate change come up more as an issue from our employees, and they're asking us what we can do to make change and be better. And we, as I mentioned, we had chosen time-sensitive global health as an issue because we feel like it's an issue of access, and technology is often an enabler of access, and so that's why we went down that route. But then we've had to make some changes ourselves. Just to give you a small example, we have lunch brought in every day, and we've banned all use of disposable utensils, because we were starting to hear from our employees that climate change is really growing as an issue. It's feeling more urgent to everybody, particularly for younger employees, because it feels like the next generation will be impacted. So we're going to have to think, this year, I mentioned the example about the carbon offsetting question. Employees really want to know, great, we're a distributed company, but we're flying a lot. So what can we do about that? Yeah. So we take a long-term view on the initiatives we support, but that's one that's definitely rising up, and we're going to be starting to have conversations. 2019 was the year that we funded PD.org, which is our fund. And the year prior to that, we joined the 1% Pledge. But we really need to think now, as we continue to fund PD.org, what's next? What's the big issue that we feel like, A, we can have an impact on, but B, why we should be there in particular? Because I don't think we want to do things because they're of the moment. We want to understand that maybe our product can be helpful, not just money that we give.
Darlene, are there any issues that clients are coming to that seem like are really coming to the top? Yeah. Climate change, I think, is what Carolyn has mentioned, and kind of healthcare access. Is there anything that you're seeing?
Yeah, definitely environmental conversations and issues for. I would say beyond that, D&I has been a huge topic within our client base this year. And, how vocal are we willing to be on these issues? How much do we want to be saying? What's our position as a company? So I think that D&I has been a huge one for us, and a lot of questions around that. I will say that when we're counseling clients, there's a lot of reticence from clients, and a lot of it's driven by how willing an executive is to go out and speak on these issues. It's very much, if your CEO is the spokesperson, it's very much CEO driven, how willing clients are to speak out on issues. So we get a lot of clients who they have a position, but it's if someone is willing to go out and speak on that position on behalf of the company. So I think I know the three of us chatted about this a few weeks ago, but we're only going to have more of this conversation in this year of election. And it's going to be a hot button issue for sure for clients in the industry.
Oh yes, no, it has already come up on pretty much every call that I've done with folks. One thing that we didn't talk about was data privacy versus data security, and this is interesting to me because new research is showing that basically consumers have a pretty high level of leniency and understanding when a brand is a victim of a cyber attack, but they have less patience with like a willful exploitation of their data. So I'm wondering if this is, because you all both work, in technology, whether this conversation is coming up.
Yeah, I'm happy to start off. One of the things I was going to actually mention at the top of the call around one of the demands that we've seen is because every tech company is essentially a data company today, we've seen a lot more conversation around crisis planning. And a lot of that is how do we react in the moment to any data issues, even if there's so much in the gray area when it comes to data use that I think we have a lot of clients asking about how do we think about this? How do we plan for this? And then second to that, I would say, yes, I think consumers are more comfortable with use of data, but I think when it comes down to how you manage those situations and if there's a breach, transparency and communication will make or break that breach or that issue. So I think that's when our clients have leaned on us the most is in those moments in time, being prepared to be transparent, communicative, honest, and sharing with that audience. That will beget you so much forgiveness for, a challenge that almost every tech company has faced at some point in time. So I think it's all in how that communication is handled in the moment.
Yeah, I agree with you, darling. I'm not having that experience at PagerDuty. We're not using that type of data. But when I think back to being on the agency side and working with clients, transparency and speed of action as well. And I think when it comes to transparency, one of the very challenging PR questions is, can you truly go off the record with a reporter, be vulnerable about the fact that you're not perfect and you want to make changes, and have that be a successful PR strategy for you? Because my belief is you can, and I agree with you, darling, but I think where that becomes challenging with different stakeholders is that puts the CEO in the spotlight, and personally accountable. Often legal teams will feel very uncomfortable with that approach. But the one thing I think we all do know is that it gives the communications experts a seat at the executive table in figuring this out, because it is not an issue that's going to go away, and hiding from it will really just ultimately to essentially kind of create your demise as a business.
I love that, Carolyn. The value of sort of being vulnerable in moments like that. So we have about 15, slightly less actually than 15 minutes. I do want to remind the audience, if you have questions, please feel free to include those here. If not, we'll keep the conversation going until the top of the hour. We've had some great comments, but if there's any questions, please feel free to chime in. So I wanted to talk about talent a little bit. Carolyn, are you hiring this year? And if so, what are the skill sets that you're looking for, and has it changed at all from what you would have looked for, say, not even just last year, but a few years ago?
Yeah, it's a great question for where we're at right now. We've started headcount planning, and we are hiring in content creation and customer marketing in order to help us tell our product story. So, I think what I might have thought in the past was, we need to do more to tell a product story. Let's hire a product PR specialist who will work with the media and attend industry events. And we're actually not going down that path. So we have a comms director on our team, and we have an executive comms leader. But we're looking to really mine customers and tell stories with customers to get the message out there. And so customer insights, we find, is crucial, because we're just noticing the media, they don't want to hear your product story and your features. They want to hear, what difference did you make for a customer? So that's why we're making that type of hire, but to hit product goals. And then on the content side, it's really about having more kind of shareable, snackable content pieces that we want to share. Say we have invested in having a podcast, or say we've created a pretty significant research report. It's not a one-time only thing. That's content that can live on an ongoing basis. So we're looking for somebody with the skills to pull small narratives out of that, create visuals, and get that to really resonate across our own channels.
Mm-hmm. And Darlene, you had mentioned that you all are kind of expanding the profile in terms of what you look for in talent, and of course, both in background but also in geography in terms of where they might be based. Is there anything else you're noticing, Darlene, from the type of person that both wants to work at somewhere like Pan, or the type of needs that your clients are having from a talent perspective?
Yeah, so I would say for Pan specifically, yes, we've been a lot more open about location. And I would say that there's been a little bit of a shift to more versatility in players. So we have a lot of specialists within Pan, specialists in our IM group, within content, creative. And I would say that a lot of the skill sets we're now looking for is someone that can be a little bit more versatile across all functions. So someone that, has a core level of understanding around IM capabilities, who can do the media pitching, who is a creative thinker. And I think that, what we've gotten our teams really comfortable with is there's a lot that you can teach within this, but passion, curiosity continue to be kind of the traits and attributes that we're always looking for, because everything else can be taught when those kind of core things exist. Within the client base, I will reinforce what you're saying, Carolyn, around, customer advocacy and someone that can really harness that. I think, I've been doing this for 20 years, and I think that it's still a problem that clients have, is how do you get customers to be part of your story. But I think we've seen even more is like, how do we really elevate the voice of the customer, and how do we operationalize this within our marketing group? So we make sure that we're partnered really closely with the sales team to make sure that we have these customer stories as like an asset. So I certainly think that we've seen more clients either hiring or allocating a resource specifically to focus on customers.
So I also want to touch on agency. I know, Carolyn, you have both been in-house and agency side. Now that you're back in-house, how would you describe, how can an agency be a good partner for you today?
Yeah, I think I'm a big supporter of this best of breed agency model. I feel when I was working in the agency side, and I was working at Method Communications, and that's definitely a best of breed agency, I felt the pendulum swung that way in terms of what clients were looking for. And now I've gone on the client side. I feel I have a sense of why. I would put them in the camp of best of breed at media relations with technology media. And I feel it's so crucial to have that skill down. And actually, hearing both of you say you're hearing media is growing in importance, it really brings that home. I think what happens a lot with marketers, though, is if you've got a marketer managing a PR agency, they feel that agency should be able to take their marketing materials, which are designed for a customer audience, and make that resonate with other types of audiences. And then they ultimately end up frustrated. So if that's what they need to go to a content specialist in addition to a great media relations firm, and really work on their storytelling. And I noticed some of our clients doing that at Method, and I'm feeling that is the need now that I'm on the in-house side. If you don't have great content in-house and you're not able to storytell with kind of an unbiased lens without drinking your own Kool-Aid, which is a hard thing to do, you're going to need some outside help from some professional communicators. So what we've actually done, in addition to having our, AOR, who does our media relations and really is connected in the tech world, we're working with a firm that is very strategic around training executives to land very precise messages, and then challenging us in our messaging development. Are you truly differentiated? Are you really standing up against competition? Do people understand what it is you're saying? Are you too kind of inside out? So I think that we will continue to see the importance of specialisms in the agency landscape, and the sort of total one-stop shop of I can cover every single need you have in every single market, will sort of, they will struggle, and they'll need to launch kind of niche groups within their broader agencies.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. That's something that we've been seeing the trend move in that way, but the market seems to be divided into two, right? I mean, at the bigger end, it very much still is one-stop shop. We can provide all of your needs, but then we are seeing thriving boutique and mid-sized agencies that do one thing very, very well. We do have some questions now, so let's work through some of these. One is, speaking of talent, what advice would you give to someone that is just starting their career in PR in comms? So what advice would you give to folks who are say graduating this May?
I'll jump in here. I would say just, keep a really open mind, be open to trying everything. I think that everything, if I look back, I don't know that I would have known. I also was agency side, then in-house, and then swung back around. And you spend a lot of time, I think, when you first graduate, trying to map everything out and thinking how, your career is going to look. And honestly, the journey it's probably not going to look the way that you imagined. So just take it all in, take every one of those experiences and build on it. And know that you don't have to have it all figured out. If I could have gone back to my 23-year-old self, I would have told myself, relax, like chill out, learn, engage, be curious, have great mentors, and like the rest kind of follows, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've always been a person who had a plan. Probably a 5-year plan most of the time. And I think that can actually stop you from being spontaneous and exploring opportunities. So I would say kind of read everything, show up when you're invited, be really curious, because it can be so hard to really understand where your particular skills fit. And if you're succeeding at something, why? If you're failing at something, why? So I think it's curious. And then going back to what you said about mentors, Sally, I do agree, and I've been lucky to have some great mentors, but I also think it's very hard for people to find a mentor and know how to ask someone to mentor them and engage with them. So I think advisors are really helpful, because I think mentoring, it's something we all want, and it's that sort of idea of a long-term relationship, but just advisors in certain elements, like go and email somebody and ask for their help, ask them for a coffee, ask them for some feedback, but be open to doing that yourself as well as you get further on with your career. Sort of good karma, basically, paying it forward always.
Excellent advice there. So another question from Dan Sorensen. It seems like contributed articles are becoming increasingly difficult to place. How do you go about prioritizing them, and what's your approach to engaging editors?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to start off here. I definitely think, we do work on a lot of contributed content for our clients. And I think the number one thing that we always remind our clients about is making sure it is part of a macro conversation. We cannot be talking product. We cannot be talking company. And I think editors shut down when they hear that. They want to really understand how what you're bringing to the surface is, educational and part of a bigger conversation. So making sure it's not self-serving, that's like rule number one. And, I think that then it's really, either your internal PR person or your agency that really can find the right home for that content, but making sure it's based in conversation and broader trends versus company specific.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I've said this a couple of times, like I believe in kind of niche messages to niche audiences. I think that's a place where contributed content still plays really well. So if you're working with developers and engineers, I think getting tips from your own specialists, it doesn't have to be a senior executive, that are kind of real and applicable is a great way to do content. Tying it into current themes is really important. There's shopping season, so be retail specific around that time of year. But one of the things that we're doing less of is trying to place what I would call broader kind of leadership content, our views on how to be a leader. And rather, we're working with contributors who already have their own large audiences. And Forbes is a great example there. So if we have a story to tell, we might sit down with a contributor, and, they obviously will write something because they're required to publish a certain number of pieces per month. And we feel it's better to sort of participate in reaching somebody else's audience than to try and create one for ourselves and create that content. And, we came to that conclusion, honestly, because we get into the point where we work with an executive and they would be drafting something with us and we wouldn't be able to place it. We'd have initial interest from a reporter, and then they would pull back when they saw the article. So, if they felt like it wasn't a reach for their audience, then we should learn the lesson that, it wasn't going to get enough eyeballs and it wasn't worth our time either.
Yeah. That's a really good point, Carolyn. It's like, when to abandon something, when to say, look, this may not be the right fit. We are unfortunately out of time, but I am going to end with a futuristic question. We are starting a new decade. I'm going to ask both Carolyn and Darlene, what is your prediction for this industry in the next 20 years? It could be as science fiction as you want.
I don't mind going first, although I don't think mine's science fiction, but, I would say that no matter how much, technology we have in place, the humanization of the story will always exist. 20 years, 40 years, 100 years. It's like, at the end of the day, we are humans, technology enabled. So I think the humanization of all stories for brands, for people, will always be paramount.
Yeah.
Excellent.
I think the erosion of trust will cause some change in how we consume our news. If you look at the New York Times, they're one of the few traditional outlets whose business model is succeeding right now. People are signing up for a subscription because they've stuck to their principles. They're not trying to throw out a ton of content. They're really trying to create high quality content, and they're holding our leaders accountable. And I feel that, in an era where trust is so broken and, Facebook is accused of sort of meddling in elections, we need more sources of trust. So I think we'll start to see some of the additional media kind of win through. There'll be a smaller group, but they'll rise up again in importance, and it won't be this kind of total democratization of content, and what you read on a feed and from a blogger is as important to you as, as somebody with 20 years of journalism behind them.
A very hopeful and optimistic view from both of you. That was great. Well, thank you, Carolyn, and thank you, Darlene. This was an excellent conversation. And if I'm sure, if folks have any follow-up questions, they probably know how to reach us from our Twitter handles, which I believe was available to everyone. And this recording, I believe, will also be available. So if anyone had any issues signing on early or any sound issues, hopefully the link should work. And if you have any colleagues who wanted to join but weren't able to, definitely feel free to share the link with them. And we will also be writing a summary of this conversation in the Holmes Report, so you can look for it there as well. Again, thank you everyone for joining, and thank you to our great speakers.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye-bye.